I never thought I'd be in a position where I'd have to change the locks on my own house to keep my sister out. But life has a way of throwing unexpected curveballs at you, especially when family is involved. Let me start from the beginning. I'm Emma, and I have an older sister named Sabrina. Growing up, Sabrina was always the golden child, the one who took risks, chased dreams, and supposedly knew how to live life to the fullest. She married young, had 2 beautiful daughters, and inherited our grandmother's house. I, on the other hand, took what my family called the safe route. I worked hard, saved money, and eventually bought my own house with a mortgage, using the $100,000 our grandmother left me as a down payment. "Emma, you're so boring," Sabrina would often say during our family gatherings. "All you do is work and pay bills. Where's your sense of adventure?" I'd just shrug it off. My house might not have been as impressive as her inherited property, but it was mine, and I was proud of it. I had my routine, my peace, and my independence. Little did I know that my supposedly boring life would soon be turned upside down. It all started about 6 months ago when Sabrina burst into my house one Sunday afternoon, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Emma, you won't believe the opportunity I've found," she exclaimed, barely taking off her shoes before rushing into my living room. I was in the middle of my weekend cleaning routine, but I knew that look in her eyes. It was the same look she had when she convinced our parents to let her go backpacking through Europe at 18, or when she decided to have a destination wedding in Bali that nearly bankrupted our parents. "What is it this time?" I asked, setting aside my cleaning supplies. "There's this amazing medical startup," she began, pulling out her phone to show me some fancy presentations. "They're revolutionizing the healthcare industry. Tom and I are thinking of selling the house and investing in it. You should do the same." I stared at her, wondering if she was joking. Sell my house? The one I'm still paying a mortgage on? To invest in a startup? "Don't be such a scaredy cat," she rolled her eyes. "This is a guaranteed return. Triple the investment in just 1 year. You could buy an even bigger house after that." "Sabrina, I don't know anything about medical startups or investments," I tried to reason with her. "And I'm perfectly happy with my current house." She looked at me with that mixture of pity and disappointment I'd grown used to over the years. "This is why you'll always be stuck in the same place, Emma. You're afraid to take risks, to grow. You're just stagnant." The conversation quickly turned into an argument, with Sabrina calling me a loser for not jumping at this amazing opportunity. When I expressed concern about her risking her family's only home, especially with 2 young daughters to think about, she just laughed. The day after Sabrina's visit, I went to see our parents, hoping they might talk some sense into her. I should have known better. Mom was in the kitchen making her signature lasagna when I brought up the conversation with Sabrina. "Your sister told me about the investment opportunity," Mom said, not even looking up from her cooking. "I think you should seriously consider it, Emma." "Mom, she's talking about selling her house, her only house, and putting all that money into some startup we know nothing about." Mom put down her spatula and turned to face me, wearing that expression I'd seen countless times growing up, the one that said I was disappointing her yet again. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" she sighed. "Sabrina is always striving for self-development. She's not afraid to take risks. But you?" She shook her head. "You're just lazy, Emma. You don't want to change your life for the better." Over the next few weeks, I tried everything to convince Sabrina to reconsider. We had countless phone calls that all ended the same way. "Emma, this is my chance to get rich quickly," she'd say. "Stop being such a party pooper. This is a legitimate investment opportunity." "Have you even researched this company?" I asked during one of our calls. "Have you talked to a financial advisor?" But Sabrina wouldn't listen. She sold her house and invested most of the money in the medical startup. With what was left, she and Tom took their daughters to the Maldives, renting a house there while they waited for their dividends to roll in. The photos started flooding my phone almost immediately. Sabrina on pristine beaches, her daughters playing in crystal clear waters, sunset dinners by the ocean. Each picture came with a caption designed to twist the knife. Living my best life, while some people are too scared to chase their dreams. This could have been you, sis, if you weren't such a chicken. Another day in paradise, while the boring people stay home. Even our parents got in on it. During our weekly family dinners, they'd look at Sabrina's latest Instagram posts and sigh. You see, Emma, Dad would say. You could be there too if you weren't so careful all the time. Your sister really knows how to live, Mom would add. It's not too late to join her, you know. The investment opportunity is still open. I sat through these dinners, quietly eating my food while they browsed through Sabrina's photos and talked about her courage and vision. Sometimes I wondered if I was the crazy one for not seeing this amazing opportunity they were all so excited about. But deep in my gut, something told me this was all too good to be true. 6 months passed, and the photos from the Maldives stopped coming. At first, I thought maybe Sabrina had finally grown tired of trying to make me jealous. Then one morning, I saw the headlines. Medical startup exposed as massive fraud scheme. Thousands of investors lose everything in healthcare scam. Startup founders flee country amid fraud investigation. My hands shook as I read the articles. The company Sabrina had invested in, had gambled her entire future on, was nothing but an elaborate scam. All that money, our grandmother's house, everything was gone. I tried calling Sabrina, but her phone was off. Tom's too. Finally, after 3 days of silence, I got a text from Mom, your sister's coming home. They arrived at our parents' house, looking nothing like the carefree family from those beach photos. Sabrina's designer clothes were replaced with wrinkled travel wear, and the girls looked exhausted. They'd spent every last penny they had from the house sale trying to maintain their lifestyle in the Maldives, believing until the very end that their investment would pay off. 2 weeks later, Mom called me. Her voice sounded strained, different from the proud tone she'd used when bragging about Sabrina's brave investment. Emma, we need to talk, she said. Can you come over? When I arrived, the house was chaos. Toys scattered everywhere, suitcases still half unpacked in corners, and the sound of my nieces running around upstairs. Mom looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes. I can't do this anymore, she confessed, slumping into a kitchen chair. Our house is too small for all of us. I haven't had a proper night's sleep in 2 weeks, and I'm constantly cooking and cleaning. Dad sat beside her, looking equally worn out. Emma, we hate to ask this, but you have that big house. Before they could finish, Sabrina came into the kitchen. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying. Gone was the confident sister who'd mocked my boring life choices. In her place stood someone I barely recognized. Please, Emma, she sobbed, grabbing my hands. Just for 3 months. That's all we need. Tom and I will find jobs, save up for a place of our own. I promise we won't stay longer than that. I looked at my sister, really looked at her. The designer clothes and expensive jewelry were gone. So was that smug smile she'd worn in all those beach photos. Her daughters peeked around the doorframe, quiet and uncertain, so different from their usual bubbly selves. 3 months, I finally said, my voice firm. Not a day more. And I mean it, Sabrina. Thank you, she threw her arms around me. I promise we'll have everything figured out by then. You won't regret this. The first few weeks of having Sabrina's family in my house were interesting. I expected them to immediately start job hunting, but that's not what happened. Instead, my house became some sort of social hub, with Sabrina and Tom's friends constantly coming and going. We need to decompress, Sabrina explained one evening when I found her and Tom drinking wine with their friends in my living room. We also need to maintain our social connections. That's how you find good job opportunities. But weeks passed, and these social connections weren't leading to any jobs. Every morning, I'd leave for work to find them still in their pajamas, planning another get-together. Every evening, I'd come home to find them networking with friends. When are you actually going to start looking for work? I finally asked 1 month into their stay. You're so uptight, Emma, Tom said, scrolling through his phone. We're still processing our trauma. We need time to gain strength. Finally, after a month of processing, they both found jobs. I thought this would be the turning point, that they'd start saving money for their own place. I was wrong. Instead of saving, they started spending their salaries on what Sabrina called maintaining their standard of living. My kitchen became filled with exotic ingredients I couldn't pronounce, delivered by expensive specialty food services. I can't just switch to regular food overnight, Sabrina explained while unpacking a $200 grocery delivery. My body got used to certain things in the Maldives. I need to transition slowly. When the 3-month mark approached, I decided it was time for a serious conversation. I found Sabrina in the kitchen, ordering another exotic meal delivery on her phone. So, I started, trying to keep my voice casual. Have you started looking for places to rent? She looked up from her phone, surprised. Oh, come on, Emma, don't be so pushy. We need more time to find the right place. More time? The agreement was 3 months. That was the deal. Why are you being so selfish? She frowned. We need to find a place that's in the right school district for the girls. These things take time. And how many places have you actually looked at? Her silence was answer enough. That evening, my phone rang. It was Mom. Emma, Sabrina told me you're trying to kick them out, she said accusingly. I'm not kicking them out, Mom. The agreement was 3 months. It's been 3 months. She has small children, Emma. You can't just send them out on the street. What kind of sister are you? I closed my eyes, feeling a headache coming on. Fine, I said finally. 3 more months. But that's it. This is the last extension they're getting. You're doing the right thing, Mom said, her voice softening. They're family, after all. Family. That word was starting to feel more like a burden than a blessing. As I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just made a huge mistake. When the utility bills arrived that month, I nearly had a heart attack. The numbers were more than triple what I usually paid. Water usage had skyrocketed, electricity consumption was through the roof, and don't even get me started on the heating bills. I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by bills, doing calculations that made my head spin. My mortgage payment was already substantial. I'd put down $100,000 from my grandmother's inheritance as a down payment, but the monthly payments were still significant. Now, with 4 additional people in the house, my utilities had become another massive expense, one I hadn't planned for. Sabrina, I called out one evening, bills in hand. We need to talk about these. She glanced at the papers, then back at her phone. Oh, those look high. They are high, very high. I think it's reasonable that you and Tom help with them, considering you're both working now. She looked at me as if I'd suggested she give up oxygen. Emma, we're trying to save money for our own place, remember? We can't afford to pay bills right now. Besides, everything will work out. Stop worrying so much. But I had plenty to worry about. On top of the financial strain, I'd somehow become an unpaid babysitter. Every weekday followed the same exhausting routine. Our parents would pick up the girls from school and watch them until I finished work. Then, instead of going home to relax, I'd drive to our parents' house to collect my nieces. I'd take them back to my house, help them with homework, make dinner, and wait. And wait. And wait. Sabrina and Tom were supposed to be home by 6 p.m., but they rarely arrived before 9 p.m. Sorry we're late, Sabrina would breeze in, looking far too put together for someone who'd supposedly been stuck at work. The meeting ran long. I understood perfectly when I saw the Instagram stories their friends posted, happy hour drinks, dinner gatherings, social events, all featuring my sister and her husband, while I sat at home watching their children. One particularly late night, after they'd finally returned home and the girls were asleep, I confronted Sabrina again about their plans to move out. The deadline for this extended stay is coming up, I reminded her. Have you started looking for places? She waved her hand dismissively. Everything will be fine, Emma. You really need to stop stressing about everything. That's not an answer, Sabrina. Are you even saving any money? Of course we are, she said, but wouldn't meet my eyes. Just trust me, okay? When have I ever let you down? I bit my tongue to keep from listing all the times she had, in fact, let me down. Instead, I watched her disappear upstairs to her room, my guest room, in my house that I was paying for, while I sat surrounded by bills I couldn't afford and a growing resentment I couldn't contain. 6 months. It had been 6 months of mounting bills, endless babysitting, and watching my sister and her husband treat my house like their personal resort. I decided it was time for one final conversation. I called them both into the living room one evening after the girls had gone to bed. We need to talk, I said, sitting across from them. Next week marks exactly 6 months since you moved in. As we agreed, that's when you need to move out. I expected protests, explanations, maybe even promises to start looking for a place immediately. What I didn't expect was laughter. Sabrina actually laughed. Move out, she said, still chuckling. Oh, Emma, you can't be serious. I'm completely serious. The agreement was 6 months. That was already double the original time we discussed. Sabrina exchanged an amused look with Tom before turning back to me. But why would we move? The girls love it here, we're all settled in, and let's be honest, this is good for you too. Good for me? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Of course. Think about it, Emma. You're getting real-life experience in taking care of a family. It's perfect practice for when you finally settle down and have kids of your own. You should be thanking us, really. I sat there, stunned into silence, as Tom nodded in agreement. Plus, he added, spreading his arms wide, this is a wonderful house for a large family. There's plenty of room for all of us. No point in having all this space just for one person, right? They continued talking, making plans about future room arrangements and discussing how we could optimize the space better, but I'd stopped listening. In that moment, I realized something that should have been obvious from the start: they had never intended to leave. All the delays, the excuses, the promises, they had been playing me this whole time. I nodded along with whatever they were saying, letting them think they'd won. But inside my head, a plan was already forming. The next morning, I called my office and scheduled a vacation day for the following week. Then I started researching locksmiths. 7 days later, I woke up early and got dressed as if I was going to work. I waited until Sabrina and Tom had left for their jobs, then sprang into action. The locksmith arrived at 9 a.m. sharp. While he worked on the locks, I started on the bedrooms. 6 months of their lives had spread through my house like an invasive species, but I was determined to root it all out. I worked methodically, room by room, packing their clothes, books, toys, and all their belongings into cardboard boxes. Their expensive organic groceries went into separate boxes. Their toiletries were carefully wrapped and packed. The girls' toys and school supplies were organized and labeled. I was angry, yes, but I wasn't going to be cruel about it. By early afternoon, the locksmith had finished installing the new locks, and I'd filled my garage with neatly stacked boxes, containing every trace of their presence in my house. I stood in my newly emptied guest rooms, looking at the bare mattresses and empty closets, feeling a strange mixture of guilt and relief. As evening approached, my phone started buzzing with calls from Mom. I watched it ring and ring, each time her name flashing on the screen. I didn't answer. Then the texts started coming. Emma, where are you? The girls are waiting. Emma, this isn't funny. Come get the children now. Emma, answer your phone. I turned my phone to silent and waited. Around 9:30 p.m., I heard them pull up in the driveway. There was the usual sound of car doors slamming, children chattering, then the unexpected jingle of keys against new locks. The confusion started first. I could hear them trying different keys, probably thinking they weren't putting them in correctly. Then came Tom's voice, "What the hell?" The knocking started softly at first, then grew louder. "Emma," Sabrina's voice rang out. "The keys aren't working. Let us in." I walked to the door, but didn't open it. "The keys aren't working, because I changed the locks." There was a moment of stunned silence, then explosion. "You what?" Sabrina screamed. "Open this door right now." "No," I said firmly, "I'm done. I'm done paying double utilities. I'm done being your unpaid babysitter. I'm done watching you waste money while living rent-free in my house." I heard the girls starting to cry, and Sabrina immediately used that to her advantage. She brought them closer to the door, their sobs clearly audible. "Listen to them, Emma. Look what you're doing to your own nieces. How can you be so heartless? Don't you dare use your children as emotional blackmail," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "If you cared about their stability, you wouldn't have gambled away their home on a get-rich-quick scheme. You wouldn't have spent 6 months avoiding responsibility while I cleaned up your mess." "Just let us in," Sabrina pleaded, changing tactics. "We can talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about. Your things are packed in boxes in the garage. You can take them now." "You had no right," Tom shouted. "I had every right. This is my house, the house I pay for, the house you've been living in for free while lying to my face about finding your own place." They stood outside for another 20 minutes, alternating between threats, pleading, and insults. Finally, I heard them moving toward the garage. It took several trips to load everything into their car, punctuated by Sabrina's loud complaints and Tom's angry muttering. Just as I thought it was over, my phone rang again. "Mom. How dare you throw your sister out?" she screamed before I could even say hello. "What kind of person does this to their own family? Sabrina should be living with you. You need to help your sister." "I did help her, Mom, for 6 months. Now it's your turn. Let's see how you like having them live with you for half a year." The line went dead. I stood in my empty, quiet house, feeling simultaneously terrible and relieved. I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time in 6 months, I could breathe freely in my own home. The aftermath of that night was exactly what I expected. Within days, my phone was flooded with messages and calls from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Apparently, Mom had been busy spreading her version of events. At first, I tried to explain my side of the story. I spent hours on the phone with aunts, uncles, and cousins, detailing the 6 months of financial strain, the broken promises, the constant babysitting. But it was like talking to a wall. They'd already made up their minds, based on Mom's narrative of the cruel sister who threw her family out on the street. Eventually, I stopped trying to defend myself. Let them think what they wanted. I had my peace back, and that was worth more than their approval. Then, about a month after everything happened, my friend Rachel called with some interesting news. "You're not going to believe this," she said, trying to contain her laughter. "Your parents kicked Sabrina out. Apparently, your mom couldn't handle it anymore. Said something about them treating her house like a hotel and never helping with anything." Sound familiar? I couldn't help but laugh. 6 months I'd dealt with it, and my parents couldn't even make it through one. But the real kicker came a few weeks later when my cousin Jessica reached out. She'd always been the family gossip, but for once I was grateful for her tendency to share everything she heard. "Emma, you need to hear this," she said. "Sabrina and Tom found an apartment, but guess what they're doing with their money now? They're investing in some space startup. Sabrina's going around to all the relatives, telling everyone how this is going to make her rich. Says she's going to buy a house twice the size of yours." "Are you serious?" I pressed my hand to my forehead. "After everything that happened?" "Oh, it gets better," Jessica continued. "She's trying to get everyone to invest with her. Says it's a ground floor opportunity or something like that. She came to my house last week with all these fancy presentations about space mining or whatever." I felt a weird mix of emotions, frustration, pity, and something close to relief. Relief that I'd gotten them out when I did, before they could try to drag me into another one of their schemes. These days, I don't talk to Sabrina anymore. Sometimes I miss my nieces, but I know this distance is necessary. I see their photos on social media sometimes, Sabrina still posting about their exciting investment opportunities and upcoming wealth. I hope she'll figure things out eventually, but I'm done trying to save her from herself. As for Mom, we haven't spoken since that night. But through the family grapevine, thank you again, Jessica, I heard she's been singing a different tune lately. Your mom was at Aunt Linda's last week, Jessica told me. She actually defended you. Said she finally understands why you did what you did. Apparently, living with Sabrina opened her eyes to how difficult it is to share your space with people who don't respect your boundaries. I just smiled when I heard that. Sometimes people need to experience something themselves before they can understand your perspective. Mom might come around eventually, and if she does, I'll be here. But this time it'll be on my terms.
Did you get the package? Starting today, Mom will be living with us, so be prepared. Tom said casually over the phone. Yes, I received the package. Tom had decided, without my consent, that his mother would move in with us. Mom's coming today, so make sure to help her settle in. Mom, when will he ever cut the cord? Tom, who constantly belittled and looked down on me, his wife. I had reached my limit. I wasn't going to let him have his way anymore. And I certainly wasn't going to live with a mother-in-law who had treated me poorly. Well, that's interesting. I just moved out of the house myself. I had finally had enough of Tom, with his selfishness and financial irresponsibility. I chose to leave him and embrace my freedom. What happened to him and his mother afterward was beyond anyone's imagination. My name is Emily. After graduating from university, I joined a securities firm and was entrusted with sales. There were days when I couldn't even take a proper lunch break while out visiting clients. However, my hard work paid off, and I quickly became one of the top performers in the company. The reason I was able to work so hard was because I wanted to repay my mother. My father passed away when I was young, and my mother raised me on her own. She worked day and night, ensuring I never felt the absence of a father. Thanks to her, I was able to graduate from university. Despite being so busy, my mother never missed any of my school events, and always packed me lunches filled with love. She never once complained, always greeting me with a bright smile. After I secured a job, my mother finally reduced her workload, allowing her to have more time for herself. She had worked so hard for me, and now I wanted her to enjoy a slow and joyful life. It was my turn to work hard for her. One afternoon, I was killing time in a coffee shop. I had about 30 minutes until my next client meeting. I decided to enjoy a nice cup of coffee and relax for a change. The coffee shop in the business district was bustling with office workers. Despite the time of day, some, like me, were passing the time, others were working on their laptops, and a few were in the middle of business meetings. Everyone was spending their time in their own way. It was rare for me to have a moment to observe people like this. So I decided to enjoy my limited time alone. Suddenly, I made eye contact with a man sitting a few seats away. Embarrassed by my wandering gaze, I quickly looked away. I then turned my attention to my phone. There was still some time before my meeting. Hi, is that Emily? The man who had caught my eye earlier approached me. Wait, what? Startled by the sudden conversation, I dropped my phone. You're still as clumsy as ever. The man laughed loudly and picked up my phone. I was frozen, trying to figure out who this man was. It's me, Tom. We were in the same seminar group in university. That's right. I remembered now. He always sat behind me in our seminar classes, talking to me with the same bright smile he had now. Tom. It's been so long. We lost touch after graduation, so I never thought we'd run into each other like this. I was genuinely happy to see him again. Back in university, I had always enjoyed hearing his laughter from behind me. He was popular, well liked by everyone. Oh no, it's almost time for my meeting. I've got to go. The clock was nearing my meeting time. I couldn't be late. I hurriedly got ready to leave the shop. Wait. Give me your contact information. I quickly pulled out my phone. From that day on, we started staying in touch. He worked as a delivery driver for a courier company and was often in the area of my office. As a result, we began to see each other more frequently during work. And our relationship quickly grew closer, eventually leading to us dating. It felt like fate had brought us back together. 3 years after we started dating, he proposed to me. It felt like a dream. I imagined our married life filled with laughter and happiness. Our marriage was supposed to be full of joy. But then something happened that changed everything. Emily, you were raised by a single mother? When I visited Tom's parents' house to greet them after our engagement, the conversation turned to my parents. And when Tom's mother learned that my father had passed away long ago, she frowned. Did your mother really raise you with love and care? Tom's mother, who was sitting across from me at the table in the guest room, looked troubled. I was a bit taken aback by her unexpected reaction. Of course. My mother worked day and night to raise me. But she always took time off for my birthday and Christmas. She also made me lunch every day and attended all my school events. I wondered if she held some prejudice just because I was raised by a single parent. Taking time off for birthdays and Christmas, making lunch, and attending school events, those are things any mother should do. That doesn't prove anything. Isn't doing what's expected as a mother a sign of love? I didn't know how to respond. And you're still contributing your earnings to the household, right? If you're struggling so much, your mother should be working more. It felt like she was insulting my mother, and I couldn't help but feel disheartened. Children from single-parent families often receive less love, which can lead to distorted personalities and a greedy attitude towards money. It's quite concerning. Even if she had such prejudices, was it appropriate to say them in front of me? I was beginning to feel afraid of my future mother-in-law. What are you talking about? Just because she was raised by a single parent doesn't mean there's anything wrong with her. Emily has grown up to be an admirable person. She works at a well-known securities company that you see on TV commercials all the time. Tom, you better work hard too, or your income might fall behind Emily's. At that moment, Tom's father, who was sitting next to his wife, spoke up with a mix of seriousness and humor. It was true that I earned more than Tom, but I didn't mind that at all. Your mother must be very happy that her daughter, whom she raised with such dedication, is getting married. Tom's father gave me a warm smile as he said this. Emily, from now on, consider me your real father. If anything happens, let me know. I'll do whatever I can to help. Those words from my father-in-law brought me immense comfort. Thank you. I appreciate it, I said, looking into his eyes. My heart felt warm, and I was on the verge of tears. But when I looked to the side, I saw Tom's mother's stern face, clearly not convinced about our marriage. I look forward to your continued support, I said at the entrance and left their house. Same here. Take care on your way back," Tom's father said kindly, while his wife glared at me silently. Her gaze was more terrifying than any words, and I left their house with lingering anxiety. A few months later, our wedding took place. It was a small ceremony in a suburban wedding hall, with only close family members invited. The ceremony went smoothly, and we pledged our eternal love in front of our families. After that, a small reception was held, with our relatives gathered around us, enjoying the meal together. This was actually the first time my mother and Tom's mother met. Normally, there would have been several opportunities for the families to meet before the wedding, such as during the engagement or a formal meeting. But Tom's mother had fallen ill every time and never attended. Whether she was genuinely sick or just pretending, I couldn't be sure. So, this was also my first time seeing her again since our engagement greeting. "Nice to meet you, Helen. I'm Lisa. I'm so happy to have such a wonderful connection through this marriage," my mother said to Tom's mother, looking a bit nervous. "I look forward to our continued relationship," my mother said with a smile. Tom's mother responded with a small voice, sighing. "I wish we had chosen a daughter from a more respectable family." I don't know if my mother heard her, but she maintained her gentle smile. After that, Tom's mother started chatting happily with her relatives, and never once made eye contact with my family. "Thank you for coming today, Mom. You must be tired," I said as we walked through the bustling streets on the way home from the reception. The lively neon lights and the cheerful voices of the people filled the night. A city that didn't seem ready to sleep. Not at all. It was a beautiful ceremony. The food was delicious. "Thank you," my mother replied with her usual smile. "Tomorrow is the day, isn't it? You're leaving home and starting your life with Tom," she added. "That's right. Tomorrow, I will finally leave my parents' home and start a new life with my husband. Sometimes, you might have disagreements and even argue. But when that happens, make sure to face each other and talk it out. As long as you care for each other, you can overcome anything. And always hold hands and stay together as a couple. That's the greatest happiness." My mother had likely gone through many hardships after losing my father. Her words resonated deeply with me. "Emily, be happy," she said with a warm smile. The neon lights reflected off her eyes, making them sparkle. "Yes, thank you, Mom." I fought back the tears that threatened to overflow. Together, we left the lively streets behind and returned to our quiet home. The next day, my married life with Tom began. We rented an apartment under my name, but we decided to split the rent equally. My work was going well, and I gained even more clients. As a result, I became busier than ever, with more overtime and late nights at the office. Tom would always greet me with a smile when I returned home exhausted, and would have dinner ready for me. Our dinners together were so enjoyable that they wiped away all my fatigue. Tom was supportive, sharing the household chores, and understanding the demands of my job. His massages before bed were the perfect remedy for my tense muscles, and I was deeply grateful for his kindness. Tom cherished his parents, especially his mother. Because of this, he would always take me to visit his parents' house on the weekends. However, those visits were far from enjoyable for me. "What? You let Tom make dinner every night?" Tom's mother would scowl again. The start of another painful visit. "That's why I don't like people from single-parent families. They haven't been properly raised. You think working is everything and neglect your household duties." Poor Tom, he's tired too. But I always made breakfast and lunch for us. Growing up poor, you're so obsessed with money. That's why you prioritize work over your family. I really don't like single-parent families. Yes, money is important. But my reason for working isn't just for the money. It's to grow as a professional. Plus, Tom has his favorite car, he can go golfing with his colleagues. And we sometimes enjoy luxurious meals at his parents' house, all because I work. You stay out late doing a job you love and leave all the housework to Tom. You're so selfish. It's a typical trait of someone raised in a single-parent household. Her spiteful words kept coming. It was clear she couldn't stand the fact that I was raised by a single parent. Tom never argued with her, he just listened with a smile. I would always keep my head down. The person who always helped me in those moments was Tom's father. What are you talking about? Helen, you've never worked, so you wouldn't know. Working means taking on heavy responsibilities. It's fulfilling, but it's also incredibly stressful. Thanks to his words, I would always find the strength to lift my head. Besides, thanks to Emily, Tom is living happily. There's no problem at all. Emily, thank you for everything. Thanks to Tom's father, I could endure his mother's harsh words. He felt like a real father to me, and I was very fond of him. But suddenly, a nightmare unfolded. The next day, I was working at my desk in the office, preparing a report that had to be submitted by the end of the day. My phone rang, it was Tom. I answered in a quiet voice. Emily. Dad. Dad. Tom sounded frantic. He could barely get the words out. I stepped out of the office and into the break room. Tom, what's wrong? Calm down. What happened? He spoke to me in a trembling voice. Dad was in a car accident. He's in critical condition and unconscious. A moment of silence followed. My mind went blank. Please, come to the hospital right away. I'm heading there now. Tom gave me the name of the hospital and then quickly hung up. I rushed out of the office and jumped into a taxi. It can't be true that Dad is unconscious. I must have heard wrong. He's going to be fine. He has to be. In the taxi, I kept repeating those thoughts to myself, trying my best to calm down. I arrived at the hospital that Tom had mentioned. It was a large general hospital. I was directed to the emergency room. A police officer was standing at the entrance to the room. I gave a slight nod to the officer and entered the room. Inside were Tom and his mother. Tom's mother sat weakly in a chair, her eyes and nose red from crying. Tom's shoulders were slumped. I approached the bed where Tom's father lay. He was covered in bandages, with a large wound on his face. His body was hooked up to numerous tubes, and he appeared to be sleeping. I learned that Tom's father had gone out during work to mail a letter. While crossing the street at a green light, he was suddenly hit by a car that made a sharp turn. The car, after hitting him, continued to swerve before jumping the curb and crashing into a street tree. A high level of alcohol was detected from the driver. Please wake up, Dad, I whispered, gently holding his hand. His hand was warm and strong. While Tom and his mother were called by the police to talk, I stayed by his side, holding his hand the entire time. I could feel his heartbeat. He's alive. He just needs time to wake up. Dad, when you wake up, let's get you healthy again and go home together. Even if there are lasting effects, it's okay. I'll take care of you, just like you've always taken care of me. Now it's my turn. I didn't cry. There was no need, because I believed he would recover. He would get better and smile at me again with that kind smile. But he never woke up. A few days later, in the middle of the night, we received a call from the hospital. We rushed to be by his side. The hospital room was bustling with doctors and nurses. His condition had suddenly taken a turn for the worse. His steady heartbeat had become erratic. "Dad, hang in there. Please." Both Tom and his mother desperately called out to him. A few minutes later, he passed away quietly, as if he had waited for us to arrive. His end was so sudden and unexpected. How could this have happened? Just the day before the accident. He had been smiling and chatting with me, just like always. He would always reprimanded Tom's mother whenever she said something harsh to me. He was full of life, and now he was gone. I held his hand all night, unwilling to let go. His hand was still warm, and I wanted to believe that he was still alive. But by the next morning, that warmth had faded. "Dad, thank you. You always helped me, treating me with kindness like a real daughter." I wonder if my words reached him. A year has passed since then. After his funeral and burial, we slowly began to accept life without him. But our lives had changed drastically. Tom's mother was deeply heartbroken by the loss of her husband and started staying at home all the time. Worried about her, Tom began visiting her more frequently. It was only natural, after all, she had lost her beloved husband so suddenly. I supported Tom's decision to be there for her. Tom's mother had lost weight, and her energy had dwindled. Worried, I occasionally visited her too, to check on her. "How can you not come around more often when I'm going through such a hard time? Don't you care about me?" This is why I dislike people from single-parent families. You just don't understand other people's feelings. Her spiteful remarks never ceased. Was she coping with her grief by taking it out on me? Worse still, her bitterness began to change Tom. Hearing her daily complaints about me, Tom slowly adopted her prejudice, looking down on me as well. "You're like this because you were raised by a single parent." That became his constant refrain. Over time, he stopped coming home entirely, and we effectively began living apart. Weeks passed. We only communicated by phone, and even then, Tom continued to belittle me. He also stopped contributing his salary to our household, leaving me to pay all the rent. I assumed he was spending his money on supporting his mother. I tried to convince myself that was the case. One day, Tom was informed of a transfer. His delivery company had opened a new branch in a different region, and Tom was chosen to manage it. The new branch was about a 3-hour drive from our city. So Tom decided to live there on his own. Tom's mother considered moving with him but ultimately chose to stay in the city, unwilling to leave the place full of memories of her late husband. And so, they were separated. A few weeks after Tom's transfer, an envelope arrived at our home. It was addressed to Tom. Since Tom hadn't changed his address after the move, all his mail was still being sent to our home. It was an unfamiliar-looking envelope, and I checked the sender. What? No way. I was shocked by what I saw. This is it. There's no point in us staying married any longer. Our marriage is already over. With that envelope in hand, I made up my mind. It's time to get a divorce. Just then, the doorbell rang, and a delivery driver arrived. I opened the door and was met with a surprising sight: several large cardboard boxes addressed to Tom. The sender was his mother. I signed for the packages and stood there, feeling overwhelmed. Where am I going to put all these boxes? I cleared some space in the room and stacked them in a corner. Since they were addressed to Tom, I couldn't open them. I wondered what was inside. At that moment, my phone rang. It was Tom. Did the packages arrive? His tone was softer than usual. They did, but what are we supposed to do with all this stuff? Ever since I transferred, Mom's been calling me every day, saying she's lonely. Not just at night, but she's started calling during the day too. It's starting to wear me out. I thought, since he loves his mother so much, he could at least answer her calls. Then I came up with a brilliant idea. If she moves in with us, she won't feel lonely anymore. Tom seemed to misunderstand what living together meant. If he wanted to live with his mother so badly, he should have taken her with him to his new place. So, the rest of her stuff will arrive in a week. Please make sure to receive it. Mom will be moving in that day too, so take care of everything. Take care of everything? What does he mean by that? And if he's on his own, how does he plan to take care of his mother? Take care of everything? Are you coming back? He must have thought about what's next, right? No, it looks like I'll be here longer than expected. I won't be able to return for a while. So, for now, I need you to live with Mom. Then he hung up. This is a joke. He's belittled me, stopped contributing to the household. And now he's deciding, without even consulting me, that his mother will move in? My anger was boiling over, and I couldn't stop trembling. It's time to end this life. A week later, Tom called again. Did the packages arrive? Mom should be heading over there this evening, so make sure you're ready. She's probably tired, so help her unpack. I couldn't stand hearing him go on about his mother. You grew up in a single-parent household, so you're not very considerate. But I'm counting on you to take care of Mom. I took a deep breath to calm myself before responding. The packages arrived this morning. And I just moved out of the apartment myself. It's such a coincidence that everything happened at the same time. There was a moment of silence. If you want to keep living in that apartment so badly, you'll have to renew the lease and pay the rent yourself. What? What are you talking about? If I stay involved with this family any longer, I'm going to break. I'm done being manipulated by him. A week ago, I decided to leave that apartment and put an end to our marriage. Don't you get it? I've already moved out and gone back to my parents' house. I took all my things with me. The only things left in that apartment are your mom's boxes. The rest is up to you. By the way, I left the divorce papers on the doorstep. So sign them and submit them to the city office. My mother, who was helping me unpack, overheard the conversation as I had the phone on speaker. She quietly listened to Tom's voice echoing through the room. What nonsense are you spouting? Are you at your parents' house? Mom's going to the apartment this evening. Go back there right now. You can't just leave her alone. Don't you feel sorry for her? Tom's voice grew louder with anger. I'm sick of your mom obsession. If you love her so much, then take care of her yourself. I have a mother too, and I've decided to prioritize her, just like you do with yours. I didn't care what he said anymore. I was going to live my life on my terms. You married into this family. You're using our last name. Don't you understand the responsibility that comes with that? Being a wife means becoming part of our family and treating Mom as your own. I could almost picture Tom's face turning red with rage on the other end of the line. His selfish words pushed me to my breaking point. Then, my mother spoke calmly. Tom, what are you confused about? Just because she took your last name when you got married doesn't mean anything. We're still blood related, a family connected on a much deeper level. That's something that will never change. And since you're getting divorced, the last name will change anyway. And being a wife or a mother-in-law won't matter anymore, right? My mother chuckled sarcastically. Tom seemed to be at a loss for words. Then she pressed the red button on the phone, ending the call. It was over. All that was left was to wait for the divorce papers to be filed. I looked at my mother with a sense of relief. "Thank you, Mom." She smiled back at me. That evening, after we had finished dinner and were cleaning up, the doorbell rang suddenly. A sense of dread washed over me. "Who is it?" I asked through the intercom. "Please, open the door. I'm begging you." The voice on the other side was Tom's, as he pounded on the door. Fearing the noise would disturb the neighbors, I reluctantly opened it. "Please. Come back. I'm begging you. I'm sorry for everything." Tom rushed towards me. "You're not serious about the divorce, are you?" "I can't do this without you." It was too late for him to change his attitude. My mind was made up. "I'm serious. I told you, I'm done with being married to a mama's boy. I've already moved out, so you need to deal with those boxes by the end of the month. They're still sealed, so you can just send them back." Tom suddenly broke down in tears, collapsing to his knees and bowing his head. "Please. Mom has already given up the apartment she was living in. And now she has nowhere to go. Can't you reconsider? Emily, please. Let's live together. I'm sorry for the way I've treated you. We can't manage without you." Even his mother was trying to appeal to my sympathy now. This must have been a plan they concocted together to manipulate me. What a ridiculous charade, what a waste of time. "I already told you. If you want to live in that apartment, then renew the lease under your own name. Why are you trying to make this my problem? Or is there some reason you can't rent the apartment yourself?" Tom remained frozen, his head bowed. "And no, it's not that." Sweat dripped from Tom's forehead. "Just as I suspected." "Then what's this? Is this why you're struggling financially?" I showed Tom a photo on my phone. It was of the letter that had led me to decide on divorce. I had taken a picture of the letter beforehand and saved it on my phone. "Can you still say there's nothing wrong?" The letter was from a consumer finance company, and beneath the recipient's name. It was marked in red as a final notice. "I haven't opened it, but I'm guessing you've racked up quite a bit of debt. You haven't contributed a single penny to our household. So what have you been doing with your salary to end up in this mess?" I delivered the final blow to Tom. The real reason he wanted to reconcile was simple: he needed my income. The thought was so ridiculous, I couldn't help but laugh. "Well, you see." There was a brief silence. I made some bad investments. A friend told me about a great opportunity, and I trusted him. I poured my salary into it every month, and even took out loans. I didn't want to be outdone by you, Emily, working at a securities firm. I wanted to prove I knew about investments too, and that I could make a lot of money. I wanted to show you up. Show me up? When had I ever looked down on him? Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, his mother said, "It's my fault." I told him that Emily, being an elite salesperson at a securities firm, must be looking down on us. But it wasn't a great opportunity at all. It was a scam. I lost everything, and the debt just kept piling up. Desperate to pay it off, I borrowed more, hoping for a big win, but it all ended in failure. Unbeknownst to me, Tom had been sinking into a gambling spiral. And the debt had grown exponentially with interest. "Please, help me. I can't make it without you, Emily. I'll do my best to pay off the debt, but could you at least help with living expenses?" Tom's face had turned pale. "You've done whatever you wanted, looked down on me. And now that you're in financial trouble, you suddenly change your tune. I'm sorry, but your debt has nothing to do with me. I have nothing more to say to either of you. From now on, we'll communicate through a lawyer. Please leave." Neither of them wanted to back down. "Please. I'm begging you." Tom remained rooted to the spot, refusing to move. "If you intend to stay here any longer, I'll call the police." With slumped shoulders, they finally turned and left. I watched through a crack in the curtains as they walked away. Tom kept stopping and looking back, as if expecting me to follow him. That was the last I saw of Tom and his mother. Some time later, our divorce was finalized. I heard through the lawyer that Tom had resisted the divorce for quite a while. Was I really such a convenient wife for him? Apparently, his mother had finally persuaded him by saying, "Forget about that worthless girl from a single-parent family and find someone new." And so Tom reluctantly gave up. Tom then set out to find a new wife. But with his overwhelming debt, shabby appearance, unkempt beard, and general air of neglect, no woman was interested in him. Even when he managed to secure a date, the requirement of living with his mother quickly put an end to any potential relationship. His hopes of remarriage faded into a distant dream. Tom and his mother ended up living together in an old, small apartment in the slums. His debt continued to grow, and it became impossible to repay with his monthly salary alone. Eventually, legal action was taken by his creditors. Tom's workplace began receiving frequent calls from creditors, and eventually, his wages were garnished. Unable to bear the shame and cold stares from his colleagues, Tom quit his job in desperation. Of course, he couldn't escape his debts. He worked tirelessly, taking on multiple jobs, delivering newspapers in the early morning, working on construction sites during the day, and directing traffic at night, but the debt never shrank. Tom's income was entirely consumed by debt repayments, leaving his mother to scrape by with the income she earned as a janitor. "I never thought I'd still be working at this age. How did we end up living like this?" Tom's mother often lamented their harsh circumstances, taking out her frustration on him. "It's all your fault we ended up like this." But it wasn't solely Tom's fault. His mother had brainwashed him with daily complaints about me, leading him down this path. No matter how much she blamed him, their situation wasn't going to improve. Eventually, they fell behind on their rent and were evicted from their apartment. From then on, they disappeared into the shadows, slipping into a life of obscurity. No one knew what became of them. Meanwhile, I enjoyed life at home with my mother. The bond we shared wasn't just superficial, but something much deeper. I was so happy when my mother had said that to Tom. "Mom, I got my bonus." They recognized my achievements, and it's the biggest one I've ever received. "Let's go on a trip to celebrate during my next vacation." From when I was a child until now, my mother had always protected me. Now it was my turn to repay her. I decided I would support her not just as a daughter but as an independent woman. "How about this beach? This food looks delicious." We planned our trip together, flipping through brochures. And there was one more parent I couldn't forget, Tom's father, who had always taken care of me. Knowing what became of Tom and his mother must have pained him deeply. Every year on his death anniversary, I visit his grave with his favorite beer. The grave is overgrown with weeds, clearly neglected. His wife probably had no time to care for it, given her struggles. I make sure to clean up around the grave. It's the only way I can show my gratitude to him now. Thank you, Dad. Under the clear blue sky, I put my hands together in front of his grave. My son finally got the wife we'd been waiting for. She is pregnant. My son is getting married, and I'll even get to see my grandchild's face. My husband brought out a special bottle of wine, and the three of us toasted together. Yet, despite all the excitement, my daughter-in-law dropped a shocking statement on me. A dirty old cleaning lady like you is a bad influence on my child. So consider us estranged. It's been a year since the estrangement began. My son says he's coming over with his family. It seems he has made a decision. I am Hilary Gale, 72 years old. Until 2 years ago, I was a leading architect. But I retired at 70 and now enjoy a comfortable retirement in a high-rise condo in New York City's Midtown with my husband of the same age. My husband was a skilled carpenter and retired at 65. To support me while I was still working, he went to culinary school and learned to cook. Now, he's even better at cooking than I am. He spends his free time building plastic models and walking for his health. As for me, I thought I would relax after retirement. But due to my inherent restlessness, I couldn't sit still at home and signed up as a temporary cleaning staff a year ago. Cleaning buildings in New York City. Sometimes I clean buildings I once designed. And I feel a nostalgic attachment to them like they're my own children. I enjoy this job because it keeps me active for my health. At work, I keep it a secret that I was a first-class architect with an annual income of $500,000 and now live in a high-rise condo. Envy from others can be quite troublesome. It's easier to be seen as an elderly lady who still needs to work after turning 70. My only real worry is my 40-year-old son. He works for a sporting goods manufacturer in New York. He's been playing baseball since elementary school and played shortstop in the Big Six university baseball leagues. He still enjoys watching baseball and likes sports in general, which suits his job in sales at the sporting goods company. My son is single. He was supposed to get married 5 years ago, but his fiancée betrayed him in a terrible way. To put it simply, she was after his money. According to my son, her attitude changed after she learned we lived in a high-rise condo. She started spending more money, inquiring about mine and my husband's health. And, worst of all, he once overheard her talking with another man she didn't know, saying, "His parents are quite old, and once we get the inheritance, we can live a rich life." The breakup was quite a scene, but somehow he managed to cut ties with her. I can't marry someone who's just waiting for my parents to die, he said with a wry smile, though I could tell the ordeal had taken a toll on him. Afterward, he moved out of our high-rise condo and started living alone in a one-room condo. It was tough for my husband and me to see how the high-rise condo had become a trauma for our son. 5 years passed without any talk of marriage or him dating someone. While marriage isn't everything, and happiness is what really matters, I still hoped he would find a life partner to spend his life with. We bought the high-rise condo about 10 years ago. Before that, we lived in a detached house in the neighboring state, left to us by my husband's parents. It was comfortable, but as we got older, it became harder to go up and down the stairs. One day, my husband suddenly said, "Hey, why don't we sell this house and spend our old age in the city? I've been hearing about these high-rise condos recently. They seem convenient and secure." Though I had never designed a high-rise condo, I was very interested. Living in central New York would allow us to easily visit cinemas and museums, And it seemed like we wouldn't get bored even after retiring. If we retire from work and just sit at home, we might get senile. My husband said, and I agreed with a laugh. So, we sold our longtime home and moved into a high-rise condo in New York City's Midtown. Living there turned out to be very comfortable, with a variety of commercial facilities and clinics on the lower floors, making it so that we almost never had to go outside for anything. We chose carefully, so the property value is unlikely to decrease significantly. We also considered eventually selling it and moving into a nursing home together. My son comes to visit once a month, joining us for dinner. One day, he arrived and announced, Mom, Dad, my girlfriend is pregnant. So we're getting married. My husband and I were initially surprised, but then delighted. What a joyous occasion, my son getting married and even getting to see my grandchild. My husband brought out a special bottle of wine, and the three of us toasted together. His partner, Mandy, a 35-year-old woman, happened to sit next to him at a baseball game. They supported the same team. And after a thrilling seesaw game where their team won with a walk-off in the final inning, they decided to celebrate together. It's nice to have a common hobby to enjoy together, I thought as I imagined my son wearing a baseball cap, attending games with his child and forming a happy family trio. Then, my son said, So, I have a favor to ask. Can we keep it a secret that you guys live in a high-rise condo for a while? It's not that I don't trust her, but it seemed like his previous experience had left quite a trauma. Understood. It's not like we have to keep it a secret forever, right? Yeah, thanks. I think we can bring her here once the baby is born. I was truly looking forward to it. After consulting each other, my son and his wife decided that given their age, they would skip a traditional wedding ceremony and opt for a photo wedding, and hold a wedding reception party instead. They told me not to bother with a formal meeting between the families, and that greetings at the party would suffice. Apparently, many couples nowadays opt for a more casual approach to marriage. Well, indeed, if spending money on a wedding ceremony and reception means less financial stability when a child is born, it seems like a sensible approach. At the wedding reception, my son's bride, Cindy, turned out to be a rather strong-willed and outspoken woman. My son is gentle and somewhat timid, so it's good that Cindy is the more assertive one. Cindy's parents are both under 60 and still working. What caught my attention was when Cindy asked, So, your father is retired, but does your mother still work? And I replied, My husband is retired, but I work part-time cleaning buildings. The look on Cindy's face when she said, A cleaning lady, was as if she was looking down on cleaning staff. My son and Cindy have started living together in a 2-room condo in Naarima, close to Cindy's parents' house. She's pregnant, and it's safer to be near her family. My commute has become a bit harder, but, my son said, already under his wife's thumb. Being henpecked by your wife makes for a peaceful home, my husband remarked. Oh. When did I ever henpeck you? No, that's just how you are, darling. We were laughing, but it was no longer a laughing matter. When I noticed my son looking terribly gaunt during his rare visit to our high-rise condo. He says the morning sickness is tough and he spends almost all day lying down. I do all the housework, well, that's okay. He said this with a wry smile. It's a part of marriage to help each other out during tough times. There will be such periods. But, morning sickness at 7 months? You should be in your stable period by now, and it usually subsides. But she says she feels lethargic and looks really unwell. People vary, but lying around too much can actually make labor more difficult. Maybe you should consult a doctor. I blurted this out because I genuinely hoped for the grandchild's safe arrival. Later, when I tried contacting my son, it seemed he hadn't taken my advice. She might be hospitalized for preeclampsia, he said. Worried, I rushed to the apartment where my son and his wife were living. Mandy had gained a significant amount of weight, probably over 45 pounds. Mandy, you've gained too much weight. Preeclampsia is dangerous. Even now, you should change your lifestyle. Be mindful of your daily diet and do some light exercise. I said this out of concern, but it seemed to have touched a nerve. What are you talking about? I need to eat for the baby. And it's natural to gain some weight. The idea that a pregnant woman needs to eat for two is outdated. Nowadays, it's common sense to eat a balanced diet and try not to gain too much weight. Caught between not knowing whose side to take, my son was flustered. Mandy, you'll be 36 by your due date, right? That's considered advanced maternal age. You need to be extra careful compared to younger expectant mothers. Maybe that was too much to say. Why do you only say things that make me anxious? Just go home, she yelled. And I was thrown out. As my son escorted me out of the apartment, I apologized. I might have said too much, but I'm really worried. To which he responded, I understand. I'll talk to her, so don't worry. Though he said that, a few weeks later, Mandy was hospitalized for preeclampsia. I thought about visiting, but my son stopped me. The hospital food is terrible, and it's making her irritable, he said. Which is expected given the low salt content. All this was the result of her eating whatever she wanted and not being active. I could only pray that I'd be able to meet my grandchild safely. Perhaps my prayers were answered. Because Mandy was discharged after about 10 days. And eventually gave birth to a healthy baby boy. My husband and I held hands and rejoiced upon hearing the news from our son. We rushed to the hospital, thanked Mandy for letting us meet our grandson, and praised her efforts, but she retorted, I didn't have him for you. It's said that mother-in-laws and daughters-in-law often don't get along. And I had thought I wouldn't be like that. But to her, I must have seemed like a nagging mother-in-law. I was quite disappointed and disheartened. Nevertheless, when I heard from my son that Mandy and the baby were discharged together, my husband and I brought gifts and visited their apartment. The newborn was so tiny and adorable, it reminded me of when my son was born. And I couldn't help but tear up. As I gently reached out to touch my grandson's hand. Don't touch him with your dirty hands. Mandy snapped. I had washed my hands meticulously at their place, yet she scolded me. Hey! That's no way to speak, my son interjected. Whose side are you on? She retorted. It's not about sides. Your father, your mother, Mandy, and the child were all precious family members. Huh? What are you talking about? A husband and child should naturally be the most important. Their argument escalated into a full-blown quarrel. Come on, both of you, calm down. As I tried to intervene, Mandy snapped. Shut up. Who do you think is at fault here? It was harsh to hear such words from someone who is technically a parent-in-law. And then she shouted hysterically. A dirty old cleaning lady like you is a bad influence on my grandchild, so we're estranged. Stunned by her outburst, my husband sighed. Indeed, showing this kind of scene to the grandchild is harmful. Yes. Mandy, is that all you wanted to say? She didn't reply. I felt very sad. My husband and I, shoulders drooped. left our son and daughter-in-law's apartment. After consulting with my husband, we decided to keep our distance from them for a while. Maybe after some time passes, things might change. Holding on to that slim hope, I looked forward to the photos of my grandson that my son sent via line. Recently, he began to pull himself up to stand, unbearably cute. The more adorable the pictures of my grandson were, the more I longed to hold him. Which was difficult. One thing I noticed was that the photos always showed my grandson alone. Normally, wouldn't they take pictures holding the child? I worried with my husband that their marital relationship might not be going well. As the year since my grandson's birth was about to pass, my son contacted me. He said that the three of them would visit us next Sunday. Did you talk to Mandy about the high-rise condo? If not, they wouldn't be coming here. Yes. I told her about the high-rise condo. And that you used to be a first-class architect with a significant income. But she didn't believe it, so I decided to bring her here. It seemed that their marital relationship was fine, and Mandy's attitude had softened, making it possible for them to get along well with us, the grandparents. He had his reasons, I suppose. Though I had questions, I decided to wait for the day to come. Wow. No way. It's really true? As she entered the door and stepped into the foyer, Mandy exclaimed with joy. She had gained even more weight since the last time I saw her. No way. This is amazing. How many rooms are there? The view is incredible too. It's on the 30th floor, right? Beautiful. Without greeting my husband and me, Mandy entered the room and started checking around. My husband and I were so absorbed in taking turns holding our long-awaited grandchild, who was sleeping soundly, that just looking at him made our cheeks relax. What? The baby woke up and started crying. Maybe he was surprised by the unfamiliar surroundings, or perhaps he was hungry. Mandy, the baby is crying. Could it be time for his milk? However, it seemed like Mandy wasn't even listening to the baby's cries. There, don't cry, don't cry. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Mandy said to our son in a tone of voice we'd never heard before, showing unexpected dependency. Hillary, you lied about being just a cleaner, but you actually made a lot of money, right? I don't quite understand, but you were a first-class architect? She approached me with a coquettish behavior. It's true that I worked as a cleaner. Wow, that's unusual. If I had money and lived in a place like this, I'd enjoy life elegantly every day. She was practically declaring herself a lazy idler. Then Mandy, getting carried away, blurted out something fatal. Once your father-in-law and mother-in-law die, this high-rise condo becomes ours, right? No, it won't. What? My son replied coldly, leaving Mandy astonished. I'm divorcing you. I'm taking custody of our child. What are you saying all of a sudden? Stop it with the bad jokes. It's no joke. I've tolerated you skipping out on household duties and parenting. Well, I gave you a child even though you're over 40 and unimpressive. You should be grateful. Her reasoning was absurd, especially since she wasn't young herself. But I can't live with someone who looks forward to my parents' death. I never said that. Do you know why I've kept silent about the high-rise condo and Mom's job? What? And why I brought you here today? Our son looked pained as he spoke. What are you talking about? This child is mine. You can't just divorce and hand over custody. Okay, I understand. I'll pay child support, so please let's get divorced. Are you telling me to become a single mother and live in an apartment? That's ridiculous. We don't need to divorce. We can all live in this high-rise condo together. Through this exchange, it was clear she was more interested in the condo than in custody rights. Perhaps our son brought Mandy here to give her one last chance. For the sake of their child, hoping they could resolve things without divorce. If only Mandy had shown more consideration towards us, his parents. Our son might not have considered divorce. However, once words are spoken, they can't be taken back. Once he made up his mind, our son refused to accept her tearful pleas. Still, as Mandy continued to protest, our son said, "I've recorded you not doing housework or parenting on video. And I've also recorded what you've said since we arrived here." "What? What is that?" "You're a liar and a coward." The worst. Mandy turned pale. "If that's the case, let's discuss this through lawyers." "But Mandy, I haven't forgotten that you told me not to touch my grandson with my dirty hands and declared us estranged." "That's right. You were the one who wanted estrangement. And now you can't just say you want to live together." As my husband and I said this, Mandy had nothing to reply and collapsed to her knees, muttering complaints as she staggered out of the room. Thus, my husband and I came to live in the high-rise condo with our son and grandson. Our son was feeling down for a while, lamenting, "Why can't I see through women? It's all because I wanted to live in a high-rise condo." "I'm sorry." My husband felt responsible, though it wasn't his fault. "Well, it's just bad luck that it happened twice in a row. You'll surely meet someone nice eventually." Even though I said that, our son replied with a sad smile, "No, it's okay. I have my son, and both my parents are healthy. I'm already very happy." Mandy, having divorced and returned to her parents' house, often left her nursing child with her daughter to go out, to her parents' dismay. When they discovered she was also in debt and not working, they scolded her, saying they wouldn't keep her at home if she didn't work. Ironically, she ended up working as a cleaner, the very job she had scorned. Being treated as an incompetent old lady. That's what happens when you look down on people like that. You're bound to be disliked at work. Occasionally, messages arrive from her to our son, wanting to reconcile. But now he doesn't even read them, let alone reply. While my husband and I were overjoyed to live with our grandson, taking care of an infant at over 70 was more challenging than imagined. Grandchildren are adorable when you see them for just a few hours. But we had forgotten how hard parenting was. After our daughter-in-law essentially abandoned her family duties, our son, who had been managing work and parenting alone for a year, truly seemed admirable. "Mom, Dad, aren't you tired? Why don't you hire a babysitter?" Our son suggested this, and we decided to hire a babysitter. A 36-year-old single mother named Cindy, who was very efficient as she was raising her own children, came to help us from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. on weekdays. She's a mother of a 10-year-old girl and a 7-year-old boy. Being here from 10 to 16 really helps. I can go to work after sending the kids to school, do the shopping, and prepare dinner in time, she said gratefully. Living together as a family of 3, they've grown quite close over time. Cindy once shared that her husband was addicted to gambling and showed no signs of changing, so she slapped him with divorce papers. She hasn't received any child support. She's a bright and resilient woman. My husband and I have grown fond of Cindy and invited her and her children over for a meal at our home on her day off, Sunday. Cindy happily accepted the invitation. "Really? When I told the kids I work in a high-rise condo, they were so envious. They've been dying to visit. Cindy's children are polite, energetic, and adorable. They quickly became friends with our nearly 2-year-old grandson. This high-rise condo is amazing. The cars look so tiny from up here. It was delightful to watch the kids running around, enjoying themselves. The younger boy was particularly fascinated by my husband's model kits. And my husband proudly showed off his collection of robots and fighter jets. This was the first time Cindy and our son met since she has weekends off. They greeted each other with, "Nice to meet you," and my son said, "Thank you for always looking after my son and my parents." Cindy replied, "I'm the one who should be thankful," and they both laughed, saying, "It feels a bit strange, doesn't it?" Actually, my husband and I had hoped to set them up. She'd make a great daughter-in-law, we thought. But we didn't want to push, so after introducing them, we left it up to them. We had already informed Cindy about our situation. That she would be caring for our grandson whose mother was not involved. I can't believe there's a mother who wouldn't want to take care of such a cute child, she had said, astonished. At the living room table, my son and Cindy sat watching the kids play. It's nice, the sound of children laughing. My son remarked thoughtfully. Yes, it's wonderful. And it's so lovely to see both your parents cooking together in the kitchen. They could hear their conversation from the open kitchen. My dad learned to cook at a culinary school after he retired. To help out my mom who was still working. My husband blushed as he shared this. I wish I had that kind of relationship. My marriage didn't work out. Me too, my son replied. Isn't this nice? I signaled to my husband with my eyes. He nodded back. Cindy, would you like to live in a high-rise condo? My son suddenly broached a crucial topic. My husband and I tensed up. Well, I think this place is wonderful. But for me, it's more important who I live with than where I live. Cindy probably gave the perfect answer. I was sure that was the moment my son fell for her. They started visiting us on weekends as a family, and our grandson joined them on outings. They looked like a long-married, happy family. Perhaps the intelligent Cindy, knowing about my son's past traumas, skillfully navigated his emotional scars and captured his heart. If so, that was fine by me. I believed she would continue to be clever and build a happy home without ever slipping up. After a year of close family ties, my son formally told us, "I'm thinking of proposing to Cindy. Do Mom and Dad approve?" My husband and I looked at each other and nodded. It's about time, huh? Yeah, I was wondering when you'd ask. Of course, we approve. Yes, of course, we said in unison. I was really looking forward to when you would bring up divorce, you know. Seriously, being poor without parents is just no good. With a mocking smile, Dorothy said this in a sharp voice. I had been tormented by Dorothy, my mother-in-law, since the beginning of my marriage. She would barge into the house where my husband and I lived without asking. Wait for me to come home from work, and endlessly complain while watching me do housework. The way I cleaned, how I folded the laundry, the seasoning of the food. She would meddle in everything, but Dorothy never offered to help. One day, after enduring so much, I finally reached my limit. You were raised in a fatherless home. So you never really learned how to cook properly, did you? Your taste buds are so messed up, your food isn't even good. Dorothy, who had been sampling the food without permission, hurled such abuse. I had been raised by my grandfather since I was a child, as my parents were not around. I couldn't forgive her for mocking my grandfather, knowing this. In a fit of anger, I brought up divorce, and both Dorothy and Howard readily agreed. Dorothy, spewing things with a tone of satisfaction, was joined by Howard saying, "That's right. The difference in family status was just too great. Next time, we'll find someone with a family as good as ours." But the two of them didn't know. The time when they could laugh was only temporary. In the not-too-distant future, they would learn the truth and collapse in despair. My name is Lucy Thompson, a 33-year-old part-time housewife. 2 years ago, I married Howard, a senior colleague at work. He had been teaching me various things since I joined the company. "If you don't understand something, feel free to ask me anything," he said with a kind smile, completely capturing my heart. I, who had little experience in love, couldn't actively approach him. Asking work-related questions was all I could manage. Even thinking about asking personal questions or inviting him out for a meal after work made my face hot. However, Howard eventually asked me out. "I was attracted to your hardworking and sincere demeanor. Would you like to date me?" I nodded without hesitation to his words. After dating for several years, we got married and started living together. In my heart, there was the joy of being able to be with the person I loved forever, as well as the relief of finally being able to reassure my grandfather. I had lost my parents when I was young, and my grandfather, Frank Irving, had taken me in and raised me. Why don't I have parents? During my rebellious phase, I would scream in a shrill voice at my grandfather, although I knew it wasn't his fault. Now that I'm an adult, such things are behind me, and we have a good relationship. The sad look on my grandfather's face at that time still haunts me. I felt guilty for causing him trouble and wanted to repay him somehow. I decided to be as filial as possible. I gave him presents with my first salary, took him on trips for his birthday, and brought him to nice restaurants. By marrying Howard and building a family, I thought I had finally truly reassured him. "Lucy, be happy." At the wedding, my grandfather said this through tears, and I cried too. Initially, Howard and I were busy with work, but we had recently settled down and started thinking about having children. Of course, I wanted children, but the pressure from my mother-in-law, Dorothy, was also a factor that made me think seriously about it. "Lucy, you've been married for 2 years now, haven't you? Don't you want to give me a grandchild soon?" I couldn't count how many times she had said something like that. "Yes, eventually." I would vaguely smile and divert the topic. But being confronted every time we met was quite stressful. Even when I looked to Howard for help, whether he noticed or pretended not to see, he said nothing. Tired of enduring the pressure to have grandchildren, I reduced my visits to my in-laws' home. But it was in vain. Dorothy started barging into the house where Howard and I lived. "Huh, Mother. Why are you here?" When I first witnessed this, I exclaimed in surprise, but Dorothy remained calm and said, "Howard gave me a spare key. We're family, so there's no problem coming in, right?" What initially happened only on weekends now occurred even on weekdays, mercilessly. About 3 to 4 days a week, I was greeted by Dorothy in the living room as I came home. I had gotten used to it, or rather, since she wouldn't stop no matter how many times I said it, I was resigned to saying, "I'm home," as a habit. And if you wondered whether Dorothy did any housework before we returned, the answer is no. On the contrary, she would say, "Hurry up and prepare dinner. I've been waiting and am starving." while I was still putting away my things and starting to cook. Outwardly, I would obediently respond, but inside, I deeply sighed. I had argued back before, but that would only lead to a long lecture. Well, even if I didn't say anything back, Dorothy would still give unsolicited advice. Or rather lectures, about housework. When I returned home late due to overtime and tried to heat up some leftovers, Dorothy would say, "Leftovers? Are you cutting corners? Food should be freshly cooked. Surely you're not letting Howard eat such terrible meals." Dorothy would criticize without lifting a finger to help, so I was utterly fed up with her. Even if I showed a hint of dissatisfaction, she would scream. "What, do you have a problem with what I'm saying? I'm giving you advice as someone with more life experience." As these incidents continued, I grew more adept at ignoring Dorothy's nagging. But there was something I couldn't forgive. While waiting for us to return, Dorothy would use the water and electricity without any consideration. Once, she left the TV on while taking a nap during the day. Thanks to, or rather because of, her actions, our utility bills were skyrocketing. Tired of her behavior, I consulted Howard several times, asking him to talk to his mother and request the return of the spare key, but he wouldn't listen. "Oh, don't say things like that," he would chide me with a smile. From his perspective, Dorothy's actions were her way of trying to get along with me. "Don't be so tense, I want us to get along," Howard would say, apparently out of goodwill, so I couldn't speak up strongly. But Dorothy's remarks kept escalating for the worse. "Really, Lucy, you're so clumsy. Maybe it's because you're from a single-parent family that things don't work out?" She would start saying things that belittled my grandfather, my guardian. And I had reached my limit. Apparently, Dorothy thought raising children as a couple was superior to being a single parent. Then, one day, I received a surprising message. "Today, your mother-in-law visited unexpectedly." The person who contacted me was a woman named Olivia, the secretary at my grandfather's company. I couldn't see her face over the phone, but I could easily tell from her tone of voice that she was making a bitter expression. What? Why would she do that? Could it be that she went to tell my grandfather the same kind of insults she usually says to me? I imagined Dorothy, with a sneering smile, spewing out words like, "Lucy is really incompetent, isn't she? You were like a parent to her, right? What kind of education did you give her?" However, contrary to my expectation, it seems she only came because the president had once said, "Please visit whenever you are nearby." She just came, ate her fill of tea snacks, and left. Apparently, Dorothy took my grandfather's polite invitation literally. "I had delicious sweets at your grandfather's company. It's so kind of him to say. Feel free to visit if you're nearby." Dorothy, who was usually waiting at our house, happily reported this to me as soon as I opened the front door. Although it's possible that my grandfather said that, can't Dorothy read between the lines? Even if she really did want to visit, isn't it common sense to contact him beforehand? I could only let out a dry laugh, dumbfounded. My response must have displeased her, as Dorothy's expression suddenly changed, furrowing her brow. And as usual, she began to make sarcastic remarks to me. "By the way, when are you going to manage to come home earlier? If you were more capable, you should be able to finish quickly and come home, right?" My lips twitched. I was used to hearing insults from Dorothy, but that didn't mean they didn't hurt. I tried not to take them too seriously, but I hadn't reached the point where I could just smile and ignore them. "If you don't come home early, Howard will always have to eat the unappetizing leftovers, won't he? Really, you lack the spirit to support your husband. I'm sorry, I've been busy with work. How I wished I could say, then why don't you cook, Mother? Instead, as I spoke, hiding my true feelings, Dorothy's eyes narrowed sharply. Don't make excuses. The poor have no leisure fits this situation perfectly. You're in this mess because you were raised by a single parent and don't have money. I couldn't hide my bewilderment at her words. I opened my mouth to retort, but all that came out were meaningless words like, well, you're just like that guardian grandfather of yours, aren't you? He was kind, sure, but his company is old and small. He probably hasn't achieved much in terms of performance. Your grandfather's clothes were always so shabby too. I wonder if he even has money to buy clothes. Being criticized alongside my grandfather was just too hard to take. Unable to endure it any longer, I raised my voice. Please stop speaking ill of my grandfather. What do you know about him, Mother? This seemed to irritate Dorothy, as her face clearly showed her anger. Oh. A daughter-in-law talking back to her mother-in-law, how rude. Apologize right now, say I'm sorry for being impudent. I stood my ground and glared back at Dorothy. It was absolutely wrong for me to apologize after she insulted my dear grandfather. The one lacking common sense wasn't me, but Dorothy. What's with that look? It really irritates me. Dorothy yelled at me. She is shorter than me. But she seemed much bigger due to her intimidating presence. You're just upset because I hit the nail on the head, aren't you? Don't you feel ashamed that your grandfather still has to work hard at his age? That's not true at all. I am proud of my grandfather. But even when I expressed this, Dorothy just snorted dismissively and did not apologize to my grandfather. Oh, maybe it's not your grandfather who should feel ashamed, but you? Isn't it embarrassing that he has to work at his age because you're so poor? Worn out by Dorothy's baseless accusations, I lost the energy to argue back. I let out a loud sigh so she could hear and said, enough, before returning to my room. From that day on, Dorothy's treatment of me grew even harsher. And her frequency of invading our home also increased. Look, this isn't done right. Do it over immediately. Whenever my way of doing household chores displeased her, she would immediately scream at me. It started with complaints about dust left in the corners of the room or sloppy folding of laundry. And she even demanded I change the arrangement of the furniture because she didn't like it. Whenever I opened my mouth to say something, she would cut me off with a loud lecture. As this continued, I realized that if I didn't say anything, the lecture would end in about 15 minutes. It was a sad lesson to learn. As a result, whenever I heard Dorothy's angry voice, I would clench my jaw and endure silently. The lectures always happened when Howard was not around. Your mother came to the house again on her own. She even gave a lecture, what should I do? Although I told him this, he would never take my side against his mother. If I just endured, everything would end without incident. I understood this logically, but I couldn't accept it emotionally. And I found myself crying in secret in the bathroom late at night. Finally, my stress reached its limit, and the day came when my patience snapped. I lost count. It might have been the 100th or even more dinner with Dorothy and Howard. Of course, I hadn't invited Dorothy, she just imposed herself in our home. As I was setting the dinner table, Dorothy reached out and snatched food from a plate before we even said, "Let's eat." I frowned, but thinking that if Dorothy noticed my changed expression, a tedious lecture would start. I quickly shook my head to dismiss it. After chewing a few times, Dorothy swallowed and burst out. "What is this food? It's really awful. Make it again. You were raised in a fatherless home and weren't taught to cook properly by a man. Your taste is so messed up, the food isn't tasty at all." With a crude laugh, she spewed her insults. The moment I heard that, something snapped inside my head. So this is what it means for one's patience to snap, I realized firsthand. Indeed, my grandfather raised me. So what? Gender doesn't matter. My grandfather raised me with love. Please stop mocking my important family, I shouted, and even after that, my anger didn't subside. And I was panting as if I had been exercising for a while. Dorothy and Howard looked surprised at first, but their expressions quickly changed to mocking smiles. Seeing that, I was shocked that none of my feelings had gotten through to them. Let's get a divorce. I can't stay with people who endlessly mock others like you do. Ah, I understand. When I proposed divorce, they agreed surprisingly easily. In fact, they seemed pleased, as if they had been waiting for me to say it. I was really looking forward to when you would bring up divorce. Seriously, being poor without parents is just no good. I was worried about your poverty rubbing off on us, so it's great you brought it up. That's right. The difference in family status was just too great. Next time, we'll find someone with a family as good as ours. Dorothy was as usual. But Howard seemed like a completely different person than before we married. Where had the kind man who had gently guided me when I didn't understand something gone? No, perhaps this was his true nature. Well, now that it's settled, hurry up and leave, you broke loser. While enduring endless insults, I packed my things and asked my grandfather to pick me up. I bit my lower lip hard and made sure not to talk back anymore. Nothing would resonate with those two heartless people. Upon receiving a message from my grandfather that he had arrived, I left without saying thank you or goodbye. I just put on my shoes and opened the front door. There stood my grandfather, looking worried. Spotting him, Dorothy deepened her grin and jeered. "Oh dear, isn't it nice of your grandfather to come pick you up? You must be starting early again tomorrow for work, right? Poor people just don't get a break, huh?" Olivia, the secretary who had come with my grandfather, had a vein pop on her forehead upon hearing this. Without anyone noticing, she had prepared the divorce papers and pulled them out of her bag to present to Howard. "You had it prepared already? How kind of you." "That's right. It saves us the trouble, doesn't it?" While laughing with Dorothy, Howard immediately signed the divorce papers. The expressions on my face, my grandfather's, and Olivia's were completely different from theirs. We were all dead serious, emotion wiped from our faces. "I'll file the divorce papers myself." "Sure, take care of it, will you?" "Then hurry up and go. I'm happy that our child won't have any poverty in their bloodline." It seemed she couldn't be satisfied without a final jab. Even though I glared at her with all my might, Dorothy was unfazed. "Well, I'll go ahead with the president to bring the car around." Saying that, my grandfather and Olivia left. Then, for some reason, Howard and Dorothy also came down to the entrance of the apartment building. "I just thought we should properly say goodbye since you took care of us." Dorothy said this, but her true intention to mock us was transparent. I kept quiet since it was useless to say anything. But I couldn't stand them making a mockery of my grandfather. I was about to turn around and unleash a torrent of complaints, but Olivia stopped me. She was, for some reason, beaming with a wide smile. I'm going to get the car, so hold back for now. She told me that and then went to the parking lot. Misunderstanding my inability to endure being laughed at as fleeing. Dorothy and Howard continued to laugh joyously. Then a luxury car arrived, and my grandfather got out. Seeing this, their eyes widened and they approached as if drawn by a magnet. Wow, that car is pretty expensive, isn't it? No way that poor man bought it himself. He must have rented it to show off. It seemed they wouldn't be satisfied until they had ridiculed us completely. I got into the car and exchanged a knowing grin with my grandfather. Seeing us, Olivia crossed her arms and murmured meaningfully, "The real show starts now." The next day, while I was visiting my grandfather's company for some errands, I noticed the lobby becoming noisy. I was standing a bit away, but since the lobby echoed well, I could hear the noise. "Bring out the president now. We know he's here." Hearing these shouts, I placed a hand on my forehead. Peeking from behind a column, I saw Dorothy and Howard causing a scene. Security guards were restraining them as they flailed and yelled, "Let go." The other employees watched from a safe distance, careful not to get involved. What were they doing here? Perhaps they were so upset about the luxury car the day before that they came to check if my grandfather really owned it. Bored, perhaps? While feeling dismayed, I approached them and asked, "What are you doing here?" My voice, devoid of any warmth or emotion, sounded detached. They turned to me and yelled, "Call the president. It's your grandfather we're talking about." I couldn't help but laugh at my misinformed in-laws, which annoyed them, causing their eyebrows to twitch. My grandfather isn't here. His actual workplace is the building next door. Next door? What do you mean? In fact, the place we were in was rarely used by anyone. The president's office was located in a rare high-rise building next door. Both this building and the one next door are owned by my company. My grandfather spoke with a voice as if crawling from the depths of hell, revealing himself in the lobby. My usually calm grandfather wore an expression I had seldom seen before, his eyebrows and eyes lifted in a demonic glare. As my grandfather approached them with large strides and looked down at them sternly, Dorothy and Howard could only open and close their mouths like fish begging for food, despite their previous arrogance in belittling others. My grandfather, still unbent and tall, loomed over them with considerable presence. Dorothy and Howard were completely overwhelmed, and all they could manage was to let out a weak, hoarse noise as they exhaled. I never expected to be looked down upon just based on the appearance of the company I work for. What kind of thought process is that? No, I mean, we weren't looking down on you or anything. Dorothy desperately tried to make excuses, but her far-fetched explanations almost made me burst out laughing. If that wasn't condescending, I'd love to know what is. The scenes of Dorothy and Howard hurling abuse at me and my grandfather were clearly etched in our minds. From the beginning, when you visited the company unannounced, I felt something was off. It's ironic to be told I lack common sense by someone without any. As my grandfather confronted Dorothy, Howard began to inch backwards. But the security guards behind him didn't miss a beat, blocking his escape and glaring at him. My grandfather sighed once before continuing. Originally, I lived a bit farther away. But when I could no longer endure my stress due to their taunting, I made preparations to set up a new company nearby to have a small measure of revenge. That's impossible. Dorothy finally managed to speak up, her voice loud. Her lips were pale and trembling, not unlike someone who just got out of a cold pool. Just a few months ago, your company was old and falling apart. There's no way you could prepare a new office in such a short time. You must be embarrassed by being ridiculed by us, so please don't exaggerate." To that, my grandfather replied calmly, "That rundown company you're talking about was the first workplace. My real grandfather started from scratch when he founded his business. I kept it because it had sentimental value." The emphasis on rundown was quite strong. Although my grandfather didn't think so himself, irritation and sadness from being belittled by Dorothy were probably infused in his tone. "Huh, your real grandfather? What do you mean? I don't understand." Dorothy collapsed weakly onto the floor, literally clutching her head in confusion, and mumbled to herself while looking back and forth between me and my grandfather. Pretending not to notice her gaze, I suggested to my grandfather, "It seems she still can't believe it. Why don't you show her the building next door?" My grandfather chuckled and agreed, indeed. Then pointed towards the entrance of the building. "Would you like a tour if it's okay with you?" His face, previously angry, had changed back to the gentle smile he usually showed me. The intimidation gone, Dorothy and Howard visibly relaxed, their faces shifting from frightened to smirking. However, cold sweat was still evident on their foreheads, showing that they were not completely at ease. "Ah, yes, well, why don't you show us around?" It seems they can't be satisfied without looking down on me or my grandfather. "It's just the exterior that's nice. The inside must be as rundown as this place," Howard whispered to Dorothy, laughing, apparently still not realizing that my grandfather was displeased with being called rundown. Whether he was unaware of his own volume or not, we could hear everything clearly. However, Dorothy and Howard, who had been displaying such confidence, lost their words as they entered the new company. The corridor bustling with many employees, the sophisticated design of the interior, they were so stunned that their jaws might as well have dropped. "What is this? To think that he's running such a large company. Don't joke with us, are you mocking us?" After standing rigid for a while, they seemed to snap back to reality, scratching their heads and beginning to go mad. "Who was it that ridiculed us first?" As they declared this, they stopped in their tracks and collapsed together, then were dragged out by the security guards. After that, we received no further contact from them. Rumor has it that after ridiculing my well-known grandfather in the industry, Howard was being given cold stares at his company. He was feeling so sidelined that he was thinking of resigning from his job. He had mentioned marrying someone of similar social status after our breakup. But now it seems like that's not possible for him. My grandfather has further expanded the company and handed over the presidency to me. And now he is enjoying his retirement. Determined not to be outdone by his greatness, I vowed to work even harder. "10 days after my husband passed away, my eldest son, John, and his wife, Catherine, came to visit me. So, you're going to be living on a pension from now on, right? How much do you get each month?" John asked bluntly. I answered honestly, just $6.50. They exchanged glances and then snickered. "Wow, how do you plan on surviving on that? And just so you know, don't expect any help from us. We're not taking care of you," Catherine said with a smirk. "Yeah, don't count on us. In fact, let's just cut ties right now," John added, laughing. At that moment, I reached my breaking point. I couldn't take it anymore. I had raised John all wrong. Finally, I calmly said, "That's fine, but don't come back regretting it." Catherine laughed even louder. "Regret it? Who would regret cutting ties with a poor old hag like you?" And so, I cut ties with John and Catherine. But a month later, they would be shaking with fear and regret. My name is Emily Johnson. I'm a 66-year-old housewife. 40 years ago, I married my husband, Tom, who was 2 years older than me. Tom was a sincere and compassionate man who always took care of me. I've been a homemaker, supporting Tom in his small business. Even now, we still live together, though Tom continues to work. Tom and I have 2 children. Our eldest, John, is now 38 years old. John was always restless and rough as a child. He grew up to be something of a bully. And there were more than a few times when Tom and I had to apologize to other parents for his behavior. John struggled with school and barely managed to graduate from a local technical high school. After that, he quickly quit the construction company where he first got a job. He's never been able to hold down a job for long and has jumped from one to another well into his late 30s. He lives on his own, but the only time he comes to see us is when he needs money. "I quit my job again, so could you help me out a little?" he would say, always making us give him money. There was even a time when we paid off his debts after he came to us in tears. But despite that, he kept coming back to us for money, and it troubled us greatly. His younger brother, Robert, who is now 35, was a different story. He was quiet, serious, and did well in school. We had a hard time with John, but Robert never caused any problems. He had a smooth school life. John would often mock Robert, calling him a goody two-shoes. And sometimes he even bullied him. Whenever that happened, we scolded John. But I swear, Tom and I never played favorites. We loved both of our children equally. Robert grew up to be a kind and capable person. He graduated from a national university and got a job at the local government office. When he was 27, he introduced us to the woman he wanted to marry, a colleague from work. "Mom, Dad, this is Mary. I'm planning to marry her," Robert said. Standing next to him was a lovely woman with a short haircut and a bright smile. Tom and I were thrilled and gave our full support to their marriage. Robert and Mary registered their marriage and moved into an apartment about 30 minutes away from our home. They would visit us occasionally, always bringing gifts and showing concern for us in our old age. Robert and Mary were very dear to us. Then, one day, out of the blue, I got a call from John. "Hello? John? What's going on?" I asked, a little excited to hear from him after so long. "I'm getting married, so I'll bring her over next Sunday," he said abruptly, and then hung up before I could say anything else. "What did John say?" Tom asked. "He said he's getting married and bringing her over," I replied, equally surprised. We contacted Robert to prepare for meeting John's fiancée. On the Sunday John mentioned, the doorbell rang, and when I answered, there stood John, whom I hadn't seen in nearly a year, with a flashy young woman with long, dyed brown hair by his side. "Hi there. I'm Catherine," she greeted us casually. She looked to be in her late 20s. I invited them in and led them to the living room where Tom and Robert's family were waiting. "Hey, Robert, you're here too, huh? You're still as plain as ever," John remarked when he saw Robert, who frowned slightly. While it was rather unusual for someone in their late 30s to be sporting dyed hair and flashy clothes like John, it wasn't the right atmosphere to point that out. Well, like I said, I'm getting married to her, John said, nodding toward Catherine with his chin. Is that so? And, Catherine, was it? How did you two meet? Tom asked. To which Catherine responded, I used to work at a girls' bar, and John was one of the regulars. Ah, a meeting at a place like that. Typical of John, I thought. Well, I kinda knocked her up, so we gotta get married. John casually dropped the bombshell, causing my eyes to widen. Knocked her up. Catherine, you're pregnant? I asked in shock. Yeah, I'm 3 months along now, she answered cheerfully. And what do your parents think about this? Tom asked cautiously. Oh, I'm not in contact with my parents. We're estranged, so I'm not planning on telling them about the pregnancy or the marriage. Catherine replied nonchalantly. Tom and I were left speechless. But given the situation, it was clear that John had to take responsibility. If that's the case, you should get married as soon as possible, Tom advised, and John and Catherine nodded in agreement. However, the next moment, Catherine said something shocking. I want to have a wedding too, so you guys can cover the costs. Tom and I both blurted out, What? A wedding? You want to have one? I asked, surprised. Of course. A wedding is every girl's dream. I've already booked a venue for next month before I get too big, Catherine said, now dropping any formality. Having a wedding is your decision, but you should cover the costs yourselves. That's what Robert and Mary did, Tom stated firmly. When Robert and Mary got married, we didn't offer much financial help beyond giving them $5,000 as a wedding gift. It was only fair to do the same for John. But upon hearing this, Catherine flew into a rage. What are you talking about? The groom's parents are supposed to pay for the wedding. We don't have any savings, she shouted. If you don't have any savings, then all the more reason to start saving for the baby, I suggested, but Catherine started crying. That's so cruel. You won't even let me have my dream wedding. What if the stress harms the baby? At that point, as the parents of the man who got her pregnant, we couldn't argue back. Catherine's always dreamed of having a wedding. You'll cover the costs, right? John demanded, and Tom and I reluctantly nodded. Shortly after that, John and Catherine registered their marriage. And the following month, they held the wedding. Even though it wasn't well attended due to their lack of friends, the wedding still cost nearly $30,000. Tom and I had planned to cover whatever the guests' gifts didn't. But after the ceremony, John told us, We're using the gifts for the honeymoon, so you guys can pay the entire cost of the wedding. In the end, we ended up spending $30,000 for John and Catherine's wedding. When I apologized to Robert for the unfairness of it all, he said, Don't worry about it, but for your own sake, you shouldn't spoil John too much. I could only nod in agreement with Robert's words. After their marriage, John and Catherine moved into an apartment about an hour away from us. We didn't have much contact with them, but about a month after their wedding, my father, who lived far away, passed away. He had been in the hospital for a long time, so I was somewhat prepared. But I still cried when I called John. John, your grandpa passed away. Will you come to the funeral? He was very fond of you. John responded with annoyance in his voice, Huh? The funeral? You expect me to go to another prefecture for that? No thanks. What? I haven't seen Grandpa in years, so I don't care. I'm not going. Deal with it, John said before hanging up. I couldn't push him further, so we held the funeral with just Tom, Robert, and Mary. They all helped me, and we managed to get through the funeral together. About 6 months after my father passed away, John and Catherine had a baby boy and named him Noah. John brought Catherine and Noah to visit us. The newborn was adorable, and I asked Catherine, "Catherine, may I hold Noah?" Catherine twisted her face and replied, "Huh? No way." I quickly withdrew my outstretched hand, feeling embarrassed. I could understand that there are stressful times after giving birth. But it still hurts that I wasn't allowed to hold my own grandchild. "Hey, we just had a baby, so how about giving us a nice gift?" John said with a grin, holding out his hand to us. After receiving money from Tom and Robert, he immediately opened it in front of us. "Come on, don't you think this is a little short?" John said, looking dissatisfied. Robert, unable to hold back any longer, spoke up. "John, opening the gift right in front of us isn't really appropriate." John glared at Robert and shot back, "Shut up. Maybe you're just jealous because you and Mary have been married for years. And still don't have kids? Sorry we beat you to it. What, are you guys infertile or something? How sad." In reality, Robert and Mary had been married for over 5 years without being blessed with children. Mary had confided in me before, tearfully admitting that they were undergoing fertility treatments. Now, she looked on the verge of tears again, and Catherine, noticing this, laughed. "Oh, so you guys are infertile? Bummer. Babies are so cute, you know?" Mary couldn't take it any longer and left the room, with Robert quickly following after her. "John, Catherine, stop speaking to Robert and Mary like that," I said firmly. Catherine responded with a sharp tongue, "Shut up, old hag." I couldn't help but snap, "What did you just say?" But John and Catherine only smirked and walked out. After that, I made sure to keep Robert and Mary as far away from John and Catherine as possible. Not that John and Catherine ever reached out to us unless they wanted something. Tom and I also decided to distance ourselves from them. However, not long after, Tom fell ill and a hospital checkup revealed a malignant tumor. The doctor told us that he had about 6 months left. I was devastated and lost control, but Robert and Mary were there to support me. "Mom, it's going to be okay. We're here for you," Mary said, crying along with me, and it comforted me a little. After I calmed down, I called John to inform him of Tom's condition and prognosis. "Oh, so Dad's going to the other side soon, huh? Well, good luck with that," John said dismissively and didn't even bother visiting Tom. It was just me, Robert, and Mary who visited the hospital regularly, doing our best to support Tom's treatment. But Tom only got weaker. I called John again, pleading with him. "John, please, your father doesn't have much time left. Please come see him. Even just seeing his grandchild might lift his spirits. Why should I bother? It's a hassle. Just let me know when he kicks the bucket." John replied, and he never visited Tom while I was there. 4 months after being admitted, Tom called me to his bedside and told me something that shocked me. But I nodded firmly. Less than 2 weeks later, Tom passed away. "Please, open your eyes," I cried, clinging to Tom's lifeless body. Robert and Mary comforted me, rubbing my back as they cried alongside me. But I couldn't mourn forever. I had to carry out Tom's funeral as the chief mourner. Exhausted, I relied on Robert and Mary to handle most of the arrangements. Tom's funeral was well attended by many people from his work, and it turned out to be a fitting ceremony for him. John and Catherine showed up but spent most of the time looking bored and fiddling with their phones. 10 days after the funeral, as I sat alone in the now quiet house, John and Catherine suddenly appeared without any notice. John, you came. I'm glad because I've been feeling so lonely. We're not here for that. The first week after the funeral is over. So it's time to talk about the inheritance, don't you think? John said bluntly. I was shocked. It's true that we would have to discuss it eventually, but I hadn't expected him to bring it up so soon. However, something else caught my attention. Where's Noah? He's still so small, you can't leave him alone. Catherine casually replied, Oh, we gave him up for adoption. What? I gasped in disbelief. Adoption? What did she mean? Yeah, raising a kid was way harder than we thought. So we got in touch with my estranged family and asked if they could take him. My much older sister decided to take him in. Honestly, it's a relief. It was such a hassle. I felt dizzy hearing Catherine speak so nonchalantly. Had John and Catherine really abandoned their responsibilities as parents? Anyway, let's talk about the inheritance. How much did Dad leave behind? He ran a business, so there must be a decent amount. How much do we get? John pressed me for answers. I replied quietly, it's about $80,000. John and Catherine both looked stunned. $80,000. Is that really all? That's so little. Catherine exclaimed. Things haven't been going well with the business these past few years. $80,000 is all there is, I explained truthfully. John grimaced but continued, Well, that's less than I expected, but whatever. We should get at least $20,000, right? He was referring to his legal share of the inheritance. By law, the spouse gets half, and the remaining half is divided equally among the children. Well, your father's will is still to be processed, and there are legal procedures to go through. So I can't give you anything right now. Just make sure it happens soon, okay? Seriously, though, this inheritance is way too small. In a time when people say you need at least $200,000 for retirement in addition to pension, you're only left with $40,000? That's sad. As I remained silent, John spoke up. Well, yeah. Mom was a housewife, after all. I guess you'll be living off your pension now, right? How much do you get each month? I answered honestly, $650. They exchanged glances. Wow, how do you plan on surviving on that? Just so you know, don't expect us to help. We're not taking care of anyone else's problems. Yeah, don't count on us. In fact, let's cut ties right now. At that moment, I reached my breaking point. I couldn't take it anymore. I had clearly failed in raising John. Slowly, I spoke to them. Fine, but don't come back regretting it. Catherine laughed loudly. Regret it? Who's going to regret cutting ties with a poor old hag like you? All right then, let's consider ourselves estranged. Yeah, but make sure Dad's inheritance gets transferred properly, okay? Then we'll be done with you. I didn't say anything in response as I watched them walk away. A month passed. I was with Robert and Mary, taking care of some business. And we were just leaving when, by chance, we ran into John and Catherine. Hey, what are you guys doing here? John asked. Isn't this a luxury home builder's office? What were you doing here? Catherine added. Robert replied. We were just meeting with them because we've decided to build a house. John looked surprised. A house? But then he quickly added. Well, I guess it makes sense since you're both government workers. But what's Mom doing here? Mary responded, We've decided to live with Mom. John and Catherine exchanged glances before bursting out laughing. Living together? With this penniless old hag? Wow, that's some serious dedication. But since we've cut ties, she's all yours to deal with. Neither Robert, Mary, nor I said anything. Catherine, still laughing, turned to Robert and Mary. So, you guys are infertile, can't have kids, and now you're going to live with this old hag? Spending all that money on a house just to have her around? How sad. Robert replied calmly, Well, we're not actually paying for the house. What? What do you mean? Aren't you building the house? John asked, confused. Mary glanced at me before speaking. We were planning to, but then Mom. Mom? What do you mean? John pressed. Finally, I spoke up. I'm the one building the house. It's a custom two-family home. And I paid $600,000 up front. John and Catherine's eyes widened. What? That makes no sense. How could you afford a $600,000 house on your pension and with such a small inheritance? Well, I have the money. It's only natural to do this for Robert and Mary since they offered to live with me so I wouldn't be lonely. John furrowed his brow. That still doesn't make sense. Don't lie, old hag. John's raised voice attracted the attention of passers-by. Well, there's no need to explain everything to you since we're estranged. Robert, Mary, let's go. With that, Robert, Mary, and I headed toward our car in the parking lot. Just as we were about to get in, Catherine yelled at Robert. Wait a minute. Is this car yours? It's a luxury foreign car. Didn't you have a regular domestic car until recently? Robert glanced at me, and I nodded. Yeah, Mom bought it for us. John and Catherine looked stunned. Since I don't drive, I figured I'd rely on Robert and Mary, so I bought the car. If they're going to drive it, I wanted them to have something nice. Catherine grabbed John's shoulder. This is weird. Even for a government worker couple? They couldn't afford a house and a car like this all at once. John still seemed confused, but he shouted at me. Explain yourself, old hag. I sighed and, from inside the car, replied to John. If you want to know more, come to the house. We're heading there now anyway. Then I told Robert, let's go, and the car smoothly pulled away. As we drove off, I glanced back and saw John and Catherine standing there, dumbfounded. About 40 minutes after we arrived home, John and Catherine showed up, out of breath. Robert, Mary, and I were enjoying tea, but we paused when they barged in. Hey, explain what's going on. You bought them a house and a car? There's no way you could afford that. I sighed again and set my teacup down on the table. All right, fine. Have a seat, and I'll explain. They sat down on the sofa, their eyes fixed on me. Do you remember that my father, your grandfather, passed away recently? You didn't even attend the funeral. What's your point? He was just an old farmer living in the countryside. My father was a landowner. What? John and Catherine said in unison. A landowner. But he was always working in the fields, covered in dirt. Sure, my father did farming, but that was more of a free time leisure. In reality, he owned prime real estate buildings and apartments that generated passive income. He believed in the value of hard work, and that's something I admired about him. So, what are you saying? Your father was rich? John asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Actually, about 10 years ago, I received a lifetime gift from him. And I've been living off rental income ever since. That allowed Tom to use his money for the business. And I knew we'd be fine in our retirement even without his money. John and Catherine were left speechless. I continued. When my father passed away recently, I inherited all his assets as his only daughter. Buying a house and a car for Robert and Mary didn't even make a dent. Why didn't you tell us about this? Did Robert know? John demanded, looking bewildered. Robert shook his head. No. We only found out when we suggested living together. Why didn't you tell us something this important? That's not fair, John exclaimed, growing agitated. I calmly replied, my father believed that children should live their own lives. Tom and I shared that belief. Besides, I knew if you found out about the money, you'd try to drain every last bit of it. A heavy silence followed as I sipped my tea. Suddenly, Catherine lost her composure. So, what does that mean? You're rich now because of your father's inheritance? How much money do you have? I smiled. I won't go into specifics, but it's around $10 million. And the rental income alone brings in hundreds of thousands a year. Catherine nearly collapsed in shock. Another silence followed before John, sweating nervously, spoke in a pleading tone. Mom, you're so secretive. How could you keep something like this from us? Yes, really, Emily, that's not fair. If we'd known, we never would have treated you that way, Catherine added, trying to sound conciliatory. As I remained silent, Mary quietly poured me another cup of tea. After taking a sip, I said, well, we've already cut ties, so my financial situation shouldn't concern you. John began to panic. Don't say that. Mom, why don't you buy us a house and a car too? It would be easy for you now, right? Catherine forced a strained smile and added, yes, you wouldn't just buy things for Robert and Mary and leave us out, would you? Why should I give money to a son and daughter-in-law I've cut ties with? I replied sharply. John and Catherine both looked like they were at a loss for words. Remember, I told you not to regret it. And you're not regretting anything, right? I said with a smile, watching as they began to tremble. They then desperately tried to undo the estrangement, using every word they could think of to persuade me. But I calmly refused, reminding them we're already estranged. Finally, John couldn't hold it in anymore and shouted, you stubborn old hag. Fine, we'll just wait until you kick the bucket. You can't have that much longer anyway. I remained unfazed. Is that so? I replied, my expression unchanged. Catherine, frustrated, snapped. Fine. Then at least transfer the $20,000 from Tom's inheritance to us right away. We'll let you off the hook today with that. But Robert calmly interjected. Actually, John, you're not entitled to any of Dad's inheritance. John sneered, what are you talking about? Do you think you can fool me? I know the law. There's something called a reserved portion of inheritance. As the biological son, I'm entitled to a share no matter what. He spoke with smug confidence, and Catherine nodded vigorously beside him. I calmly pulled out my phone and played an audio file. The room filled with the harsh, ugly voices of John and Catherine. Hey, old man. Tell us where you keep your bank books and the PIN numbers. You're going to kick the bucket soon anyway, so we'll make good use of your money. Just hand it over, or things will get ugly for you. John and Catherine's faces twisted with shock. This was recorded by my husband from his hospital bed. You both came to him while I wasn't around and treated him horribly, didn't you? I asked, my voice cold. John's voice faltered, as so what? That has nothing to do with the inheritance. No, John, it does, Robert interjected. Dad left a will stating that, based on this evidence, he wanted you disinherited. John looked confused. Disinherited, he muttered. I decided to let Robert, who had a law degree, explain further. Disinheritance is a legal process where the deceased, in this case, Dad, can request that a specific heir be excluded from receiving any inheritance. If the court approves it, you won't even get your reserved portion. John and Catherine were visibly shaken, the blood draining from their faces. Dad left instructions to disinherit you based on the mistreatment he suffered, and the fact that he had to cover your debts. The court proceedings have already started, and it's almost certain that you'll be disinherited. You won't receive a cent. This was what Tom had shared with me on his deathbed. John and Catherine were now pale with fear. Are you saying we won't even get the $20,000 from Dad? John stammered. Both Robert and I nodded. As John and Catherine stood in stunned silence, I continued. You know, even if you were disinherited, there's something called substitute inheritance, which would allow your son Noah to inherit your share. But since you gave Noah up for adoption, you can't touch that money. It will go to him instead. Catherine's eyes widened in panic. We never should have given Noah up for adoption. You had no right to be parents anyway. I've already informed your sister, who is now Noah's legal guardian, and the money will be transferred to her. Looks like your plan backfired. John and Catherine started to panic, turning on each other in frustration. I cut in before their argument could escalate further. By the way, I'm also planning to disinherit you during my lifetime. Even if that doesn't work, I'll be transferring my assets to Robert and Mary as gifts while I'm still alive. You won't get a single penny. John's face twisted in desperation as he suddenly fell to his knees. Mom. Please. We spent all our money thinking we'd get Dad's inheritance. Now we're in debt. Please, help us out. Catherine, shaking, knelt beside him, pleading pitifully, please, we're begging you. I refuse. We're already estranged, remember? If you keep bothering me, I'll call the police. This is the last time we'll ever meet. Now get out. In the end, it was Robert who had to escort the crying, desperate couple out of the house. Later, the court recognized Tom's wish to disinherit John, and he was legally barred from receiving any of Tom's estate. The inheritance that would have gone to John was given to Noah's legal guardian, Catherine's sister, who, along with the rest of Catherine's family, was incredibly grateful. Despite John and Catherine's attempts to regain custody of Noah, her family refused to give him up. The situation escalated to a court battle, which John and Catherine lost. Catherine's family then cut ties with her again, promising to take good care of Noah. I keep in touch with them and plan to offer assistance if needed, as I want Noah, who is innocent in all this, to have a happy life. As for John and Catherine, they ended up deeply in debt from their reckless spending, and had to work around the clock to make ends meet. Eventually, the constant arguments over money led to their divorce. Catherine moved far away and returned to working nights. John now lives in a rundown apartment, working in a factory by day and as a traffic control guard by night to pay off his debts. While I hope they learn from their hardships and become better people, I'm not holding my breath. Regardless, it's no longer my concern. On the other hand, I've happily moved into the new two-family home with Robert and Mary. Mom, why don't you join us for dinner tonight? The grilled fish turned out really well, Mary called out one evening. Even though it's technically a completely separate two-family home, Robert and Mary still include me in their lives and continue to treat me with kindness, just as they always have. Sure, I'll bring over some potato salad. You need to eat well, Mary, especially for the baby, I replied with a smile. Yes, just a few months after we started living together, Mary's fertility treatments finally succeeded, and she's now expecting a baby. Robert, Mary, and I were overjoyed by the news. Robert smiled warmly at me, and Mary, with her growing belly, looked happier than ever. In just 3 more months, I'll get to meet my beautiful grandchild. And I'm looking forward to that day with all my heart.